We are fortunate today to be joined by Professor Anand Rao. Professor Rao is the Distinguished Service Professor of Applied Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at Carnegie Mellon University. And for those who may not know, Carnegie Mellon has been a leader in artificial intelligence for decades and currently is a leading university in this space. Prior to joining Carnegie Mellon, Professor Rao was the global artificial intelligence lead at PwC, so he brings a lot of industry experience and perspective to the conversation. We are also very fortunate today to be joined by Professor Peter Milliken, who's a professor of philosophy and head of education and outreach for the Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence at the University of Oxford. And again, for those of you who may not know, the University of Oxford is a leading university in a number of areas, but certainly ethics in artificial intelligence is one of them. Professor Milliken is also the visiting professor of philosophy at the National University of Singapore. And I'm Bill May. I'm the managing director and global head of certifications and educational programs at GARB. So let me open up this conversation with a question to Professor Milliken. Professor Milliken, I know from prior conversations, you take a kind of a long-term view of these things, the history of artificial intelligence, where we came from, where we are now, the differences between what you might call classical AI and contemporary AI. Could you speak, to these differences and what potential risks and opportunities might be created from these differences between classical and the contemporary AI, which we have today? It's very interesting. Thank you for elaborating on that. And I mean,
can I have something on that, Ken?
Yeah, absolutely. Please go right ahead.
Yeah. So, well, I agree entirely with what Professor Rao has said, but I'd add a little bit more. That with a traditional AI system, a so-called knowledge-based system, rules would be built in as to how some decision should be reached. I mean, suppose, for example, it's you're deciding whether whether a bank should provide a loan to somebody, and you feed in your information about the client, and various rules are applied, and out comes the verdict. And whether or not the rules have been well designed, at least it's fairly clear how the verdict has been reached. So you've got explainability, you've got accountability, you can see whether it's doing it right or wrong. Now, if on the other hand, what you do is you feed in a load of historical data about people to whom loans have been given and when they've been given and when they've been refused, and you get your machine learning system to just pick up the implicit rules from there, and you use that to give your decisions, the decisions you get will be broadly in line with the past, but there will be no explanation of exactly how they've been produced, because they haven't been produced by any kind of explicit rules that we can understand. What you've got is a deep learning network with millions, maybe billions of weights in there. And the weights reflect what has been learned from all the data that's been put in. But you can't explain it in anything like rules that we would understand. So the worry there is that even if it seems to be giving the right answers most of the time, first of all, you can't be confident that it will always give the right answers. You're just kind of learning from experience about how good it is. But the second thing is that if your historical data has lots of biases in there, then those biases are going to be reflected in the network, and not in a way that you can easily remove, because they're embedded in all these billions of weights. So it's, it raises a new problem, a problem that the traditional systems didn't have, even though the new systems are in many ways, far more efficient and easier to produce and so on. What one needs to be aware of this, and it's important for companies who are using these AI systems, as Professor Rao has said, not to take them on too much trust. You've got to put in the work of verifying that what's coming out looks sensible, and being aware that sometimes it might not be.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so you touched on the issues of bias and fairness, and I mean, while they certainly are current topics, we know that there is a deep history of what is fair and fairness, different approaches to it. And I know that from speaking with you, I mean, you have a deep background in philosophy and the intersection between philosophy and computer science. And so I'm going to use this opportunity to ask you if you could speak a bit about like what can we learn from philosophy in terms of thinking about artificial intelligence, and how can it inform our concepts of responsible and ethical AI?
That's big. Well, of course, there's a rich history of philosophical thinking about ethics, and quite a lot of that can feed through into thinking about AI. I mean, for example, there are well-known principles that people apply to medical ethics, principles of non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, autonomy. And many people with AI want to add the principle of explainability. So the thought is that within our systems, we want to respect widely acknowledged ethical norms. And we might want to do that for all sorts of reasons, to build trust, reputation, to avoid scandals, to strengthen the culture within our companies, to manage risks, including ethical risks, and so forth. So there's a lot that can be learned from the tradition of ethical thinking, including in particular perhaps applied ethical thinking in areas like medical ethics, where it's obviously been long established. But I think there's another important point, which is coming from, if you like, epistemology and philosophy of science. How can we know that a theory is true? Well, we might learn that a theory is true just by experience, by trying it out and finding out that it works. And then that obviously raises big questions. How do we know it's going to continue to work in some new situation? And that sort of worry is particularly pertinent with new AI systems, especially when we discover that they can go seriously wrong. For example, there have been problems with automated cars and attempting to recognize traffic signs. And you can have systems which normally do it extremely well, but we find that very, very slight changes in the signs can lead to a stop sign being misinterpreted as a speed limit sign. Now, this doesn't happen very often, but the fact that it happens at all is very concerning. It indicates that the way those systems are operating is not the way our eyes and brains operate. So there's this very great temptation when we're using an AI system to assume that if it is very good at doing A, B, C, and D, we assume that when it comes to doing other tasks, it will do those as well as a human would, who's good at doing A, B, C, and D. But actually, drawing that inference isn't necessarily correct, because if the online system has learned how to do its stuff from samples that are on the web, then we've no reason for supposing that it will be able to carry that expertise over to other domains. So just one example, automated program systems based on large language models like ChatGPT seem to be fantastically good at writing computer programs to solve the sorts of problems that professors set their students. But that's because there are millions of examples of these things out there from which they've learned. You can't be nearly as confident that they're going to be good at providing solutions to novel problems of which they haven't seen lots of examples. So whereas if you've got a human student who was really, really good at doing all these problems, you could be very confident that their expertise is going to carry over to new domains. With things like ChatGPT, you can't be confident. So, that's raising big problems that are familiar to philosophers about how you can extrapolate from one area to another.
Thank you, Peter. I was very much wanting to get a little bit of flavor of the how philosophy plays into this conversation. So I greatly appreciate it. So let's move to a little bit more of the what you're seeing out there today, Professor Rao. I know you spent a lot of years working with industry, and in your current role, you travel throughout the world. Could you speak a little bit about how you see AI impacting or being implemented in the financial services industry, and whether you see any, just in a general sense, and whether you see any differences across geographies or so forth?
Yeah. So in terms of just the adoption of, let's just keep it to generative AI. So AI, again, has been adopted or is being adopted by a number of companies. So many of our surveys indicated maybe 25-30% of the leaders, but then most of them were trying out various analytics or AI-related models and programs. Now, when it comes to generative AI, relatively new since 2022, 2023 is when people have basically started on this journey. There was a lot of enthusiasm last year, this year, and I would say in some of the surveys that are coming out, financial services especially has been one of the more leading sectors in at least evaluating generative AI. Experimenting and evaluating is where I would put, as opposed to widespread adoption across the company or across the sector. So I don't think that's happened a great deal, except for maybe the tech industry and a couple of other industries. So tech and media are probably the ones that are using them more than some of the other more quote-unquote traditional industries, financial services, healthcare, retail, and so on. So that's just in terms of the adoption at a sector level. Now, if you look at adoption within functional areas, this is where I think we need to be very careful, just based on the conversation so far that both Professor Millikan and I have been saying. It depends on where exactly you're going to be using generative AI. If you're going to be using generative AI as part of your work, and you are essentially verifying those, and you are essentially taking it as a tool and what we call as augmenting your work, then I think because you are there as part of the overall flow, if you are using generative AI to improve your productivity, then I think that's a very valid use. For example, many of the tech vendors are implementing chatbots as part of their interface, whether it's Microsoft or Google or AWS or any of them, all have, and moving from there to Salesforce and ERP systems, they all have some kind of a front end. So whether you do generative AI or not, you're going to be getting generative AI through these co-pilots, whether this is for coding or whether it's for writing, and it's also coming into slides, websites, and so on. So those are things where the human is very much involved, and the tools are being used by the human to just accelerate or augment the way they are doing. Those are, I think, relatively good use cases because you are still at the center of what is happening and you're using these tools. Where I think things can start going very much off the kilt is when you apply it in operational areas without the full validation and testing, or you start applying it, again, in the case of financial services, risk compliance. Those are dangerous with respect to LLM. I would explicitly say even toxic when you want to use LLMs in some of these areas. The reason being, I'll just give you an example, right? So I think the example sort of illustrates so many things. So recently, there was a case, again, it's a very small case, but it is an important case. Air Canada had a chatbot, and the chatbot essentially advised the customer that they'll get a discount after a travel piece on bereavement. If they travel, and they can go and get a discount. Now, they saw that there was a chatbot that gave it. The chatbot also had a link to the company policy. Now, the interesting thing is the company policy link was there. The company policy essentially did not allow for retroactive claiming of bereavement fees. Whereas the chatbot was saying, hey, just fill in this application and you'll get a discount. Now, the person actually challenged it, even though the link was there for the company policy was in conflict with the advice given by the chatbot. Obviously, this was not tested and it went out. And the court's ruling was, hey, the advice that is coming up from this is also valid, and the company has to stand behind it, and they are liable for, again, it was a small fine, but nevertheless, the company is liable for what the chatbot is saying. So again, a very interesting case, and that's where even where people talk about, oh, it's just a chatbot. Yes, it's a chatbot, but it's giving advice, financial advice in this particular case, that you can get a discount for a certain type of event. And if that's in conflict with your procedures and policies, then the chatbot has already told that. So that's what the courts will rule. So that's a very interesting case. So you need to be very careful on how to apply it, and especially in the financial services area. Again, I think marketing, targeting, writing certain documents, marketing documents that you are vetting through, and all of those things are reasonable use cases. But as soon as you go into advice, or as soon as you start going into more autonomous use, automated or autonomous use of this generative AI, you need to be very, very, very careful. And I know that the regulators are definitely looking at it across EU, across US, on what harm it's going to cause, especially at the consumer level, right? So, and that's where I think the adoption needs to be much more measured, verified, validated, and all of those before it's actually put into operational use.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Let me just pause for a moment. We've covered a lot of ground. A lot of issues and topics have been introduced. I mean, clearly, this is a very dynamic space. It presents opportunities, presents risks and concerns. So we'll come back to our panelists in the Q&A session. But for now, let me turn to speaking about how GARP is looking to try to address some of these topics, all right? So what I'd like to cover is, why is GARP offering this new certificate program, the Risk and Artificial Intelligence, the RAI certificate? What does it cover? Why might you consider it? And what is involved in engaging with it and completing it? So GARP, for those of you who may not be that familiar with us, we are a not-for-profit professional association. We have a mission to advance risk management through education, research, and the promotion of best practices. So offering educational programs such as certificates and certification programs is a significant way in which we try to achieve our mission and advance our mission. And so we're always listening to telling us what practitioners are telling us, what industry is telling us. We do extensive practice analysis surveys. We do focus groups. We have chapter directors and meetings. Through a variety of channels, we try to understand what is it that risk professionals and financial service professionals need to know, and then we think about how can we serve that. And so we've heard over the years that there's a need for further education in artificial intelligence and machine learning, but not just simply around how to code up a model. I mean, that's certainly relevant, but a more holistic approach of a risk-focused, risk-aware approach to these issues of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so from that understanding of what industry needs, what practitioners need, what students need, GARP set about developing the RAI program. So one of the first things we did is we gathered together groups of individuals, practitioners, and leading academics from around the world. Two of them we're fortunate enough to have with us today to inform us as to what are the key relevant topics, how can they be addressed, to work with us in developing a curriculum, to work with us in developing our content so that we can serve as a conduit for this information to the learners around the world. So what does this program cover? Well, we tried to structure it so that it's holistic, well-rounded, and risk-informed. There are 5 sections that are what you might consider testable material. And then there's another section which contains a lot of optional but highly valuable, in our view, content. So the first area is the history and overview of AI concepts. As we discussed today, AI didn't just emerge on the scene in the past couple of years. There's a history there, there's an evolution. And so, we feel it's important for putting these things in perspective to have coverage of that. There are also fundamental concepts associated with artificial intelligence, concepts around search and reinforcement learning, the structure of neural networks, that we think it's good to introduce in a fundamental way so that people can develop an understanding of it before you start to move into the second section of the program, which is the tools and techniques. So the tools and techniques is the more what you might consider like the standard, the supervised learning approaches, the unsupervised learning approaches, reinforcement learning, neural nets, natural language processing, some generative AI, all of those types of models and methodologies that it's important for people to know. It's presented in an accessible manner so that if one is not a data scientist, but maybe one manages data scientists, or maybe one uses the output that comes from sophisticated models, that they too can have an understanding of how these things work and what they should be thinking about. Risks and risk factors, you then move into what are some of the risks that could be posed by implementing these methodologies and these tools in my organization. As we discussed previously, there are issues of bias and fairness, explainability. There are further issues of human autonomy, reputational risk to an organization. Some people are concerned about existential risks that artificial intelligence may pose. So we try to lay out all of these topics in a fairly clear and concise manner so that people can start thinking about what are the risks that they and their organization should be aware of and what should they be thinking about it. So then it's, okay, what should I be thinking about in terms of handling this? So we move into the responsible and ethical AI module, which is, again, from what we discussed previously, there's a philosophical basis for that, which upon which practical ethics draws, and practical ethics draws from other areas. I mean, when it starts to get into artificial intelligence, it draws from medical ethics. There's a rich field of practical ethics that we try to apply to artificial intelligence. And then responsible AI frameworks. There are responsible AI frameworks that are out there now. There are regulatory frameworks that are either out there now or are emerging. There are quasi frameworks. So we want to present all of that so that people and organizations can start to think about, okay, so we have these risks and these potential risks. How should we be thinking about handling them? What are the topics? What are the approaches? What are the frameworks? And then we have a whole section on data and model governance. When you're working in an organization or you're developing models, you're working with data, there are a lot of issues. There's data privacy issues, there's how to properly manage and store your data, also model governance. We try to cover, we worked with leading professionals in model risk governance and model risk management and developing this. So you really go soup to nuts from birth to retirement of the models, the development, the maintenance, the performance measurement, and the decommissioning process. And so we want to give frameworks that organizations and individuals can think about in terms of model and data governance, particularly as it's applied to machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then we have another section which is optional. It's not tested material. I like to call it the practitioner's corner, And in that, we have a plethora of videos, practitioner videos describing either various topics in artificial intelligence or applications of artificial intelligence in different organizations who are solving different problems. We have practical case studies. We have links to other readings. We have GARP has engaged in a number of efforts, symposiums and webinars and so forth. We try to provide all of that material so that the learner, they want to take a deep dive into a particular topic, they have it there, at the ready. So that's the basic structure of the program. And why should one consider engaging in this? Well, really, as one of the questions at the beginning of the webinar was, are you looking to enhance your skills? And the vast majority of you said yes. And so we feel that this is giving that opportunity. It's allowing people to skill up in relevant areas that can add value to their organization, that can give them some fundamental skills and understanding that can benefit them throughout their career, that can signal to their current employers, to potential employers, that they're serious about this topic, that they want to take, a broad, holistic view of these issues. And GARP is a global association, and so participating in this, you're essentially joining a global network, right? You're joining a global network of professionals. Our membership and our certified body spreads around the world. Literally, we have people from Shanghai to Chicago, from South Africa to Sweden. All the major banks, insurance companies, asset management firms. We actively try to engage and foster discussion and networking. We have chapters in cities around the world. We have events that we invite people to. We have webinars, etc. So it's not just learning for yourself, which is wonderful, but it's engaging with others as well. So by being a participant in this program, you will also be joining a global network. So how does it, what's involved? What's involved in engaging with this program and earning this certificate? This is an online asynchronous program, designed as a self-study offering. All of the material is available through our online learning platform, GARP Learning. That is all of the text, all of the complete text that one would need to read. There are downloadable slide decks that people may want to use as study aids. There are videos that accompany the text that either contextualize the topics or maybe are instructional to get over some of the difficult, topics. There are solved problems to help people do knowledge checks. Am I learning this? Am I getting from this reading what, the relevant issues? There is a practice exam, so that the end of chapter questions are not really what one might see on the exam. They're more to see whether or not you're learning the material, but we also do provide practice exam questions so that one can prep to see if they're getting ready for the actual examination, for the assessment. There's a self-study scheduling tool because we know everyone is very busy, and it's nice to have a sort of assistant to pace you in your preparation. And as I mentioned before, there's links to further readings. We want this to be a learning environment that you find valuable, not just for earning the certificate, but for your general education in this area. So registration opens on August 1st. This is the inaugural offering. There is an examination and assessment that takes place over a window stretching from November 30th to December 8th. The assessment is an 80-question multiple choice exam for which people would have 4 hours to do. It's offered at exam sites around the world. We work with a vendor, with our partner, Pearson VUE, that has sites globally. And if one registers for the program, all of the material is included. And we have detailed learning objectives. So in terms of what is it that I might be tested on, we try to lay all that out. Our goal is to educate. So we try to make it as transparent as possible in terms of what people need to learn, and then what they might be tested on. There isn't a coding requirement to this program. We want to make it accessible to a broad audience. We know that there are people who come to our programs who are very proficient in a variety of different languages, programming languages. We also know that there are people who come to our programs and people who have expressed a need to us for education where that isn't necessarily in their toolbox. But they still have responsibilities. They need to manage people who work on these projects. They need to work with the output from these models. And so we want to have an offering that provides the fundamental knowledge about the methodologies, about the tools and techniques, but does not require you to be a programmer per se in order to accomplish it. The prices are listed here on the screen. We have an early registration period that goes from August 1st to September 30th. And then we have a standard registration period from October 1st to October 31st. You can see the prices step up. So it's good to register. If one is interested and wants to register, it's always good to register early, not just because you get a lower price, which is always nice, but because you have more time to prepare. So it's kind of a win-win. You save some money and you have greater preparation time. If you are an FRM, if you've already earned the FRM professional certification, you have a further discounted price, a lower price, as well as if you are a GARP member in good standing, you also have a lower price. We try to offer our programs regardless of your status with us at as reasonable a price as we can. So with that, that's the basic structure of the RAI program. I hope people, if you're interested, that you engage with it. We do have a few minutes for some questions. So a few of them have come in for our panelists. So if Professors Rao and Millikan are willing, let me pose a couple to you. I think one follows up on one of the points that was raised earlier about the impact or the potential impact of AI on the labor, on jobs, like the difference between, is it an augmenter, is it an automator? How do you see this playing out now, and what's your expectation going forward? Like, what should people be thinking about? Professor Rao or Professor Millikan, would either one of you like to speak to that?
Go ahead, first.
It's a little bit hard to hear you, Professor Millikan. I think you may need to refresh your browser. I'm sorry, but we'll reintroduce you into the comment. I mean, can I turn it to you?
Yeah, I can talk. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. Yeah, so great question around the impact of AI on jobs. Now, I think I would treat them as sort of two separate buckets, as you just mentioned. There is an automation element of it, and then there's an augmentation element of it. More and more, I think people have been focused much more around the automation element of it. On the one hand, you have the companies essentially claiming greater productivity using these generative AI tools. Obviously, you need the funding, and in order to get the funding, you need the return on investment, and then productivity is a good thing that's happening to grab the whatever money you can for implementing these automations. Now, this is where there is differing view around what percentage of these tasks can be completely replaced or automated. So when we say automated, a task is automated and replaced. So what a human was doing is being replaced by a machine. Now, number of studies have happened, right? So from Goldman Sachs to actually Oxford was one of the very early publishers of some of the results. MIT, Darren Acemoglu, and a number of others have written on this stuff. And just to give you a range, at the lowest end, I think some of the research shows only 4.5% of the work to be automatable using the current technology. Again, we are not sort of speculating about future technology, but the current technology in a relatively safe manner. Right? So all the way to around 25-30% of the tasks being completely automatable. There's also, again, a differing view around the timeline, whether it'll take 10 years to do this or whether it'll happen in the next couple of years, right? So that's just on the automation part. Now, beyond the automation, I think what AI is also doing is enabling people to be better, more effective in their decision making, maybe in their productivity as well, right? So, and also there is argument around AI not only augmenting existing tasks, but creating or generating new tasks. Right. So, and that's something that we have started seeing to happen as well. Right. So now, given the site of generation that AI does in terms of video and audio and so on, people are getting the AI to generate under a human supervision or human guidance. Then the human then selects the various alternatives. This is happening, I think, as we speak, in the way we develop PowerPoint documents. Instead of just having the content there, you ask for various designs. So the designs come through and I just pick one and modify it, and I've got a much prettier slide than what I had before. So that's the way, I think, at least even in the creative elements, that AI is coming in. And I think we can see some of these tasks fundamentally changing. So I think the way to look at this is, what are the tasks that AI is going to replace or completely substitute with instead of a human? What are the tasks that the AI is going to augment, tasks that we currently do that we can do better, maybe faster and cheaper with the AI? And what are some of the ways in which the way we do these tasks will fundamentally change because we have this AI, because we have this generative tool with which we can brainstorm, with which we can actually help with our creation of documents, images, videos, and so on, right? So that's the sort of the entire spectrum of how you see the impact. Now, there are various studies which actually show that these impacts would essentially lower the wages in some categories, and may actually create a much more of a polarized view around the haves and the have-nots in the social sphere, right? So again, there are some significant economic and social challenges that AI will bring in. That's also been widely talked about. So a number of issues there, just in terms of automation, augmentation.
Thank you very much. Professor Millikan, are you back on?
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, and so if you want to, we're almost at time now. But if you want to have the last word on this topic, I will gladly give it to you.
Well, I agree with pretty much all of what Professor Rao said. Just one point I would make is that, as compared with previous industrial revolutions, this one is very different because it involves a lot of work that involves judgment and decision making being taken over by machines. So as he was saying, it's likely to mean that at the very high level, it increases the power and importance of individuals who are managing the systems, but it could sweep away a lot of work which is relatively routine. And that will be quite a challenge. It could also mean difference in geographical distribution of work. So it could involve quite a lot of disruption.
Thank you. And so we are at time. So I would just like to close by, I would like to thank Professor Rao. I'd like to thank Professor Millikan. I mean, this was a wonderful discussion. I think it could go on further. I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. There were questions that came in about some of the specifics about the RAI certificate. There is more information on the GARP website. There is some downloadable assets, candidate guide, so forth, that should answer a number of these questions. We will also try to get back to those who put questions in the chat box that we were not able to attend to during the course of this webinar. I hope that you found this interesting and engaging, and I hope that you consider our new RAI certificate. So with that, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Yeah, I think the important thing to realize here is that contemporary AI and machine learning does not work in anything like the way that classical AI does. In classical AI, programmers essentially understood how to solve the problem and were writing computer programs which basically implemented the same methods. Whereas with current AI, with deep learning and so forth, what's happening is that lots of data is being fed into these systems, and the systems are learning how to produce an answer to some problem from existing data, but without any explicit programming. So they learn a sort of model of the data and are able to provide answers which work extremely well in many cases. But it's very hard for us to understand how they're working, and very hard to be confident that in the future they will work reliably. So we have a sort of paradox that on the one hand, we've got systems that seem to work extremely efficiently with a lot of what we're trying to do. But on the other hand, we can't be confident that they'll continue to do so. So efforts to understand how they work are ongoing. But for a company that's wanting to do things that depends a lot on AI, there are risks, and people need to be aware of the risks, precisely because it's hard to be confident of how they will behave in the future.
That's a very good point.
Did you hear me all clearly? Yeah.
Yes.
Fine. Okay. So large language models are an example companies are pumping into their large language models huge amounts of textual data, and in a lot of contexts, the systems are learning so well that they produce answers to the questions that we give that give the clear impression that they're understanding what we're asking, that they're reasoning appropriately, and giving insightful and correct answers. But the trouble is, it's very hard to distinguish those cases from the cases where we're getting stuff that looks equally plausible, but actually getting it seriously wrong.
So from that's very relevant and not dissimilar to some of the things that Professor Rao was discussing. So let me turn to Professor Rao for a moment, because in some of our prior conversations, you had raised the issue of trust and trust management, and the systems and methodologies, earning trust and managing that trust, and maybe trusting too much in the output of some of these systems. Could you speak to that and elaborate and kind of give some insights as to how you think this issue of trust plays out in artificial intelligence?
Yes, yeah. A great question, Bill, right? So as Professor Millikan was saying, right, so there are various levels at which you need to really look at generative AI. So first and foremost, it can and it does give wrong answers. I know people call it hallucinations. That's just a very fancy word, but they're just wrong, right? So there are some things which are there are facts, and then you can verify that, and it'll give you wrong answers, right? So that's at the very basic level. Now, the challenge, as Professor Millikan was saying, is yes, it can give out wrong answers, but it also gives out right answers. The challenge for us is we don't know whether is it a right answer or not, especially if you're not a domain expert. A domain expert, you can verify that it is the right answer or not the right answer. So let's say it gives you the right answer in one instance. Then you say, oh, the system is great because it gave me the right answer in something that I knew. Now, you never know when it will give a wrong answer. So now it gives a wrong answer. You transpose your trust on the system that is giving the right answers into something where you don't know much about, and it's a wrong answer. So you don't know whether the system knows or doesn't know. And you can't identify when the system is going to be right and when the system is likely to be wrong. And that's the biggest challenge of the large language model. So that's why trust becomes important. Now, let me just take you through layers of trust. First and foremost, we need to make sure that the answers that come out of it, especially from an enterprise viewpoint, is correct. Now, how do we make sure of that? So in some cases, we would have facts against which we can check and then make sure that it is giving the right answers. In some cases, given the nature of these are more creative tasks or more elaborate tasks where there is no right, wrong answer. There is more of a descriptive answer. So now how do you define what is correct or not correct, right? So that's why we need, as Professor Millikan was saying, we need an explanation for how did you arrive at the answer. If I want to trust your answer, I need to know what exactly did you do to come up with that beautiful paragraph or the beautiful passage that you wrote. Again, challenges there. Now, even if you're able to explain, which in many cases you will not be able to, even if you're able to explain, then the question comes as to, yes, I buy this explanation and this answer, but I think you mentioned this, Bill. Am I consistent? How do I make sure that you're going to be consistent in the answers that you're going to give, that you're going to follow a similar kind of method to arrive at a correct answer? How do I know that? Right? So again, then you go from an explanation to something even before as to how does the model get trained and what is that training data? How are you using it? That essentially opens up the whole issue around trust. Trusting the answer, trusting the explanation, trusting the way it was built, trusting the way the input was provided, legally or otherwise, right? So if it's otherwise, then again, from enterprise perspective, that might have issues for most companies, I would say, if not all companies. So that's the kind of thing that we call as AI trust management. So if a human needs to trust the AI, and I think you need to be very explicit around what that process is. It's not just building in a certain way. We need to engender trust in the humans, and that trust has to be earned. It's not something that is declared, right? So I know most of the companies that have declared that we have built trustworthy AI. Just because it is trustworthy doesn't mean that individuals will trust the machine. So you need to have an explicit way of demonstrating that it is giving the correct answers, it is giving the right explanation to earn the trust of the humans. And there's also a reverse way. The AI also needs to trust which humans for what decisions. Not everyone is created equal. Not every one of us has the same expertise. People might be experts in marketing or finance or operations, and not necessarily in everything. in that sense, the AI also needs to know which human to trust for what. So the trust management includes both the human trusting AI and the AI trusting human. But then trust can also go the other way. You start trusting too much, or you become over-reliant on these AI machines. And that can cause problems as well. I mean, that's even being noticed now, especially in semi-automatic or automated driving systems, and potentially in autonomous driving, where people start forgetting or start losing some of their skills, or start depending on the technology to rescue them. And it may not always happen the right way. And that also becomes over-reliance on AI becomes an issue. So, and again, in a more traditional work situation, people start trusting the AI, and the old notion around human in the loop intervening and providing the judgment is lost. If every time a recommendation comes in, we accept that recommendation. So there are a number of these issues, and that's something that the community is not really totally come to grips with. So especially from a practical enterprise perspective, we talk about change management when we have large transformation programs. When you have a AI program or a generative AI program or even an AI program, you need to make sure that there is a component of trust management. How do we make sure that the system is producing the results and the humans can trust those, and who and how it has been validated by the experts so that the people can trust? So that's all goes into this notion of AI trust management.
Sweeping the headlines, sweeping people's attention. There's a lot of talk, a lot of activity. Can you talk about some of the sort of the speed of adoption, speed of implementation, what people should be thinking about, what's behind all of that, and sort of speak to that broad issue?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, as you're saying, very much. There is, I think, increased enthusiasm about generative AI, and I would say a lot of hype around generative AI as well. So the way I think about it, I think your earlier question was more around traditional AI and generative AI. I think of these things as waves of innovation. So we call it digital transformation. So we had the big data wave, analytics, automation, AI, and this is just one more wave of AI, which is the generative AI. So in that sense, it is like many of the things before that we have seen. It builds on previous work that's been going on almost for 60, 65 years, or even more. If you think about logic and philosophy of science and so on, it's sort of much broader in terms of how people think and how can we mimic that in machines. Now, coming back to your question around generative AI, as I said, there is quite a lot of hype. Yes, there is a step function change from some of the traditional AI, but there are also very specific issues. So let's come to that. So what's driving this this enthusiasm, if you like? I think to some extent, it's the technology and the consumer enthusiasm that we have seen over the past couple of years. That's still going on, I should say. People are excited in using some of these tools in various forms, whether it's just text or image and video, and building your own websites using AI, or building PowerPoint decks, or there's a whole host of different generative AI in the consumer space. And there's also very much a tech industry push and a lot of money going in from a VCPE perspective. All those are driving, if you like, to a large extent, the hype, some of the reality, but also a lot of the hype. But what I would say, especially, I'm assuming here our audience is more of the enterprise nature. When you come into enterprises, you just need to take a deep breath, step back, and really evaluate the technology, right? So look at not just the opportunities, but also some of the risks. There are lots of issues around privacy, security, various types of risks associated with generative AI compared to some of the traditional AI. So I think you need to be fully aware of those. Not saying you shouldn't be doing anything, but just be cognizant. And it's not all going to happen in a couple of hours. So there's I think, expectation built that because it's generative AI, Yeah, you just need to go, you don't even need to download anything, just go into one of these tools, get your answers, and everything is solved. It's not quite as simple as what people make it out to be. So there are issues around privacy, security, bias, fairness, and so on. But then there are also issues related with proprietary knowledge. Of course, when you come into the enterprise world, it's not just the consumer information that these bots or large language models are built. It's more, how do I use my proprietary knowledge, my own product information, my customer information, which obviously is very protected from an enterprise perspective. So how can that be used with a large language model? Again, lots of issues there, and how you can be more specific with respect to your domain information and knowledge. Again, there are issues to be solved. It's not that it cannot be solved, it's being solved. So you need to be very careful on how you adopt that. Last but not least is also you need to be aware of the cost. I know people think, oh yeah, it's already built, someone else has spent billions of dollars and pre-trained these models, so we don't have to worry too much about cost. In some cases, that's how it's being pitched, but you need to be very cognizant of what is the inferencing cost, right? So when I start using the AI, when I start using the large language models, what's the bill going to be? And that could be quite significant depending on the widespread adoption or otherwise of what you're doing. So I would say if you're thinking of generative AI, by all means, take a step back, evaluate it, and then dive in. Maybe centralize it to some extent, enable your people to start using, getting a lot of productivity tools by software vendors. By all means, use them, but also have a criteria on how you're going to use them and how you're going to monitor the results coming out of these generative AI tools. Let me stop there.